The day began with wind that shook the gutters and a sky that looked like it had forgotten how to choose a color. I was under a bridge inspecting beams for fatigue while snow flurries practiced their own patience. That is my work. I measure whether a thing will keep holding when the world puts weight on it without warning. I bring a clipboard, a light, and the faith that the math will speak before the failure does. I had no idea the failure that mattered was already waiting at my kitchen table at home, folded into ordinary paper with neat letters. Sienna texted and asked me to grab milk. Her message had a cheer that felt like a script. I stopped at a corner market where the clerk knows every customer by the shoes they choose in winter. I bought milk and a pack of sticky notes because I am a man who believes in lists. I drove home through a Denver cold that loves bone. The house stood the way houses do when a storm is gathering somewhere else. Quiet, polite, not yet aware. Lily met me at the door with a drawing of a bus with wings. She is 10 and makes decisions with the confidence of a small mare. Max barreled in behind her and wrapped my waist like a belt that squeals. He is 7 and sees the world as an obstacle course created for his private joy. June toddled in late, carrying a spoon she had elected as her talisman for the day. She is 4 and still undecided whether gravity is a friend. I picked each of them up with words and kissed the tops of their heads, because those are the parts most likely to listen. Sienna stood in the kitchen with a manila envelope the size of a thick letter. Her smile lasted 1 second too long. She poured water in a glass and placed it on the counter as if she were hosting a show about hospitality. She said the results had arrived and that everything would make sense now. She slid the envelope toward me and then pretended to care about a pot that was not boiling. The envelope was from the lab the court uses when people cannot face what truth might say out loud. I carried the envelope to the dining table and sat where I have sat for years of pancakes and spelling tests and dried glue. I felt the weight of paper and the way it does not change regardless of what is written on it. I opened the flap and removed 3 reports, each with a file number and a name and a set of numbers that do not care who reads them. The chain of custody log showed dates, times, signatures that matched driver's licenses, and the stamps of people who still believe forms are a kind of oath. I read Lily first. Probability of paternity consistent with biological father. I read Max. Probability of paternity inconsistent. I read June. Probability of paternity inconsistent. The room remained normal. The air stayed in its shape. I kept breathing because I have 3 children in my house, and they will not learn anything good if I stop breathing when the world hands me a sentence I did not plan for. I slid the papers back into the envelope and wrote the time on a sticky note. I placed that note on top of the reports, not as ceremony, but as structure. Sienna faced me with the posture of a person pretending to hold up a building alone. She tried to speak. I lifted a hand the way I would lift a stop sign on a site where people forget that steel remembers every error. I said we would speak later and only by text. I said the children were hungry. I asked Lily to set the table and Max to wash his hands and June to show me what song the spoon was humming. They did as asked because practice makes many things look like peace. Dinner moved like a slow train. Sienna ate without pleasure, glancing at me as if checking a clock that cannot be trusted. I watched the kids. I asked Lily about the wings on the bus, and she said it was a design for snow days because roads are liars when it snows. I told her it was perfect. Max said he ran faster than the wind that morning, and I told him the wind runs in circles on purpose to make boys feel brave. June hit her cup with her spoon like a small bell and announced that the water had a taste of cold. I told her cold is a flavor if you are honest about it. After dishes, I sent Sienna a text while she stood 10 feet away. We will handle all communication in writing. The children will not be discussed in front of them. Tonight, I will sleep in the guest room. Tomorrow, I will meet with counsel. I received a long message that tried to reshape words into excuses, then into apologies, then into a plan that sounded like a budget memo for emotions. I did not reply. I tucked each child into bed with a story about bridges that teach rivers to behave without killing them. I turned off lights. I lay in the guest room and stared at the ceiling and thought about steel and stress and the way things break exactly the way they have been telling you they will break if you would only stop pretending not to hear. Morning brought coffee and the grim grace of routine. I made lunches, tied shoes, corrected a coat zipper, and kissed 3 foreheads at the door. The school counselor knows me well enough to read my face across a room. I asked for 10 minutes on her calendar for the afternoon. She nodded with the efficient kindness of schools. Work swallowed me for a while, and I was glad to be inside math, because math never promises love, and then rearranges the furniture while you are at the store. At noon, I sat in Asha Patel's office and placed the envelope on her desk like a specimen. She reads like an engineer disguised as a lawyer. She does not flinch. She asked questions about our routine, about who handles bedtime, doctor's visits, school meetings, meals, sick days. I told the truth the way you tell a surveyor where the bedrock lies. I told her I carry the mornings and half the nights. I told her Sienna loves the stage of family life and hates the maintenance. I told her I have kept records because I am built to measure. She nodded and drew a map in words. Temporary orders to preserve assets. Requests for child and family investigator. Motion for Caleb as primary residential parent pending investigation. Petition for protective limits on third-party contact. Guardian ad litem if the judge prefers that path. We will request child therapy support and a structured plan for disclosures, if any, guided by professionals. I said I did not want to blow up a life the children rely on. She said the court cares about best interests more than blood alone. She said judges like to keep siblings together when possible. She said your consistency will matter. She said the lab logs are clean and that matters. She said the words that have become a spine in my back since that day. You will lead with care and with proof. We sent a preservation letter to the lab to ensure all samples and chain documents would be available. We scheduled a meeting with the child therapist and the school counselor. I walked back to my truck and let the cold teach focus. Then I picked up the kids and let the house be a stage where only small plays are allowed. We did homework at the table. We burned dinner and turned it into a lesson about heat. We read. We breathed. Sienna stayed in her office and did not enter the kitchen. I did not invite her. Sienna's mother called and tried to pour sugar on a wound. She said boys will be boys, which is the kind of sentence that ruins families in slow motion. She said Sienna had been under stress. She said I needed to be a rock. I told her I am a rock with 3 small handprints on it and a duty to keep their fingers from the fire. I told her we would be speaking through counsel. I hung up and washed pans because steel cannot save you from the mess it makes unless you meet it halfway. 2 days later, Sienna suggested we redo the tests at home to make sure the lab did not mix anything. She produced a kit she had ordered online, and I felt the heat rise behind my ears, the way bridges complain in winter if you listen hard. I told her the tests would only be done with chain of custody. I told her we would not perform science theater at the kitchen counter. She tried to swap a swab when she thought I looked away. I took a photo of her hand hovering, and the swab wrapper turned sideways like a flag of surrender. I did not raise my voice. I sent the photo to Asha with a timestamp and a sentence. Attempt to contaminate at home. Noted and refused. The school counselor met with me, and then with the therapist we had engaged. We discussed how to talk to children when the fabric of a family shifts. We did not talk about blood. We talked about safe rooms and steady hours and the promise that grown-ups will not use children as messengers or shields. The therapist met the kids a week later and said Max wanted to know if our house would move like a truck with legs. She said Lily kept asking whether love can be measured with a ruler. She said June wanted to introduce the spoon to her office plant. I laughed in a way that felt like a building releasing pressure after a storm. Asha filed for temporary orders. The judge set a hearing and appointed a child and family investigator. The name on the order was Mark Hahn, and that name sounded like a carpenter. He met us at the house and walked through rooms like a man who respects doorways. He sat with the kids at the table and asked about bedtime, breakfast, fights over spoons. He asked me about mornings and about my work. He asked Sienna about schedules and the support system she had in place. He listened more than he spoke. He wrote notes in straight lines. He set up home visits with each of us separately for the following week. He wanted collateral references from neighbors and teachers. He asked if the children had any special needs. I told him Lily gets migraines when life is too loud, and Max thrives on a checklist, and June believes spoons sing. He smiled and wrote down each sentence as if it were information rather than poetry. The night before the hearing, Sienna sent me a message that read like an opening statement to a jury that lives in her head. She said she felt betrayed that I had gone to a lawyer. She said this was a private matter and that we could solve it with forgiveness. She said she would agree to counseling if we let the tests disappear. I stared at the words and felt the way concrete feels before a freeze. Then I typed the only reply that made sense. We will be at the courthouse at 9. We will speak through counsel. I wish you calm. The courthouse had the smell of old paper and newer cleaning fluid. We sat on opposite benches while our lawyers spoke a language that has saved more people than any confession. Asha stood and built the case for stability. She described my role in the daily life of the children. She itemized the mornings, the medical appointments, the teacher meetings, the hours of homework at a table that remembers more math than most people will see in their lives. She acknowledged the lab results without letting them become a weapon. She asked for orders naming me the primary residential parent pending the investigation, and for structured time for Sienna that would keep routines whole and create boundaries around third parties. The other side argued feelings. The judge asked questions about schedules and logistics, and whether the children saw the same doctor. The judge granted temporary orders that made our home a schedule rather than a battlefield. I exhaled from a place below my lungs. Derek arrived in the life of this case like a man who believes good posture equals innocence. He sent me a message about wanting to meet man to man. I forwarded it to Asha. She sent him a letter reminding him that contact with me is inappropriate, and that contact with the children would be subject to court orders. A week later, the community center where Derek works suspended him for a rules violation related to boundaries with parents. I did not celebrate. I wrote the time in my notebook and labeled it only as a fact. The child and family investigator returned for separate home visits. He watched breakfast at my house, where Lily corrected me about the wings on the bus design, and Max tried to butter toast with the confidence of a small mechanic, and June taught the spoon to sing a song about oatmeal. He watched the evening at Sienna's place, where dinner arrived in a bag, and the television kept talking even when no one listened. He spoke to both of us in the soft voice a person uses with anxious animals. He asked Sienna about Derek, and about how she planned to keep partners away from the children until the court approved contact. She said none of that mattered because love always finds a way. He wrote that sentence down without blinking. We gathered letters from neighbors and teachers. Mrs. Kim next door wrote about the year she watched Max learn to love books because I read on the steps with him when the sun hit the railing just right. Coach Davis wrote about game days when I ran the snack table while Lily kept score and June colored the end of the roster with planets. The pediatrician wrote that I had never missed a vaccination visit and always brought the card. The school counselor wrote that the children light up when routines are predictable, and that Caleb follows through on every plan for them. I placed these letters in a folder that made my hands feel stronger just by holding it. The labs sent formal confirmation that the chain of custody remained intact and that any previous home attempts with over-the-counter kits could not be considered reliable evidence of anything. They included photographs of sealed envelopes and the initials of the technician, who checked each package in and out. I filed this under the section in my mind called Pillars. Asha smiled when she saw the packet and said we were building a bridge that even a storm would struggle to move. Sienna's mother hosted a family dinner that she said would be for peace. I went because sometimes peace needs a witness with a spine. She served roast and spoke about the sanctity of family while looking everywhere but at me. Sienna tried to tell a story about brave honesty. I listened until the plates were cleared. Then I said the only thing that matters when the world tries to make a poem out of a policy. The children did not ask for this. They will not pay for it. We will keep them whole. Anything that helps that mission is welcome. Anything that does not is a stone I will roll out of the road. She called me cold. I called myself accurate. I left before dessert so no one would use sugar as a reason to forget the plan. Mark delivered his interim report 3 weeks later. It read like a weather forecast that finally remembered to ask the sky what it wanted. He described a household at my address that runs on lists and warmth. He described a household at Sienna's that runs on improvisation and the kind of charm that helps when you are late, but not when you are raising humans. He recommended that the temporary orders remain in place, that the children continue with therapy, and that any introduction of new partners be delayed until further review. He noted concerns about Sienna's willingness to follow rules she did not write. He praised her affection for the children and her creative energy. He described me as stable to a fault, and then he underlined the part about fault so the judge would understand it as a joke that knows it is not fully a joke. Derek's wife reached out to Asha with her own story of rules ignored and promises repurposed. She provided messages that showed a pattern. She did not care about my case. She cared about the children her husband coached and the way parents trust uniforms. Asha asked for permission to submit a portion of those materials under seal to the court to support the request for limitations on third-party contact. The judge allowed it with a stern remark about boundaries that read better on paper than it sounded in the room. We returned to court for a status hearing. The judge spoke carefully and asked about school performance and health, and whether June still believed spoons could sing. I said yes. The judge smiled and then turned serious. The orders would continue. Sienna could have additional time each week with structure. No overnight guests who were not family. No introductions to partners without a plan approved by the therapist. I could feel the children's future becoming less of a coin toss and more of a path with posts. We left and I took the kids for ice cream, even though the air had the temperature of disappointment. We ate in the truck with the heat blasting and the windows fogging, and it felt like a camp we had built together in a small storm. I learned to cook more than eggs. Lily taught me a soup that tastes like cozy. Max learned to crack pepper without sneezing. June invented a ritual where we salute the spoon before we put it in the drawer because it works hard and deserves respect. We built a chart for chores and drew little buses with wings next to every completed row. I kept a ledger for expenses and screenshots for everything the court might one day ask for. I answered every message from Sienna with a neutral tone that tasted like stone, but kept fire away. I did not call Derek any names. I did not let anyone stand in our doorway who would confuse the word family with the word audience. Months turned. The snow left, and the city remembered what color is. The final hearing walked toward us like a person who has stopped avoiding a conversation. The child and family investigator finished his report. It recommended me as the primary residential parent on a permanent basis. It recommended that the siblings remain under one roof to preserve their bond. It recommended a plan for identifying biological fathers in a way that did not rip open every wound on the same day. It recommended therapy for Sienna focused on boundaries and follow through. It recommended that any contact between the children and new partners be slow, supervised initially, and approved by the therapist and the court. Asha built our presentation like a bridge you could live on. She began with mornings and nights and lunches and spans of quiet. She folded in reports and letters and receipts. She did not demonize Sienna. She did not pretend I am a saint. She told the truth in a way that let everyone in the room keep some dignity while still protecting the children from the parts of the truth that do not hug back. The other side focused on feelings and on my supposed coldness. The judge made notes and asked about logistics and schools and the practical effects of keeping siblings together. The judge asked if I could commit to maintaining the relationship between the children and Sienna if I received the orders I sought. I said yes in a voice that did not wobble. The decision arrived after a pause that felt like a season. The judge awarded me full custody of my biological child and primary guardianship of the siblings, pending a structured transition plan for contact with biological fathers if and when they are identified and proven fit. The judge ordered parenting classes for Sienna and a period of supervised visitation, followed by gradual, unsupervised time if compliance remained strong. The judge ordered that the children remain in therapy and that I provide monthly updates. The judge required that any new partner contact be approved. The judge awarded fees related to my need to secure stable care when Sienna left the schedule to the wind. The gavel sounded like a bridge, catching and holding. I did not smile like a winner. I breathed like a man whose chest had been wrapped for months and finally could expand. I called the school from the hallway to let them know the plan, because schools deserve the courtesy of being involved before the storm shows up. I called the therapist and booked the next block of sessions for all 3 children. I called Asha and thanked her with words that sounded small and a check that felt less small. She told me to go home and make soup. Revenge is a word better suited to movies than to kitchens. I did not torch anything. I did not pull stunts. My revenge was a steady hand that turned a life that had been played like a show into a schedule children can trust. I enforced bedtime like a court order for love. I honored school projects as if they were contracts. I made sure the lights worked and the car had gas and that the pantry contained snacks that looked like thoughtfulness when the day has been long. I replaced the smoke detector battery that had been chirping for months. I cleared out the drawer of broken pens. I changed the filter and showed Max how lungs work in houses too. Sienna stumbled and then stood taller. The therapist reported progress. She checked in on time and followed rules she did not enjoy. She stopped writing me paragraphs and started writing sentences. She told the children that grown-ups have to learn too. She kept Derek away, and he grew smaller in the narrative until he became a cautionary tale told by exhausted women to each other while folding laundry. I did not hate her. I did not forgive her all at once. I practiced both not hating and not forgiving like 2 different stretches you hold for different muscles. On the afternoon that Lily got her first migraine after weeks of peace, I sat with her in a dark room and told her about the time my father taught me to count breaths when a roof leaked and we had to wait out a storm with pots on the floor. She smiled a little and slept, and I wished for the world to be kinder than it is. Max lost a tooth and insisted we engineer a ship from cardboard to carry it across the living room to a bank made of a jar. June learned the shape of the letter J and wrote it on the fog of the bathroom mirror with a finger that will one day wave goodbye to me from a dorm window. I let the future arrive in quiet inches, and I did not try to speed it up or hold it back. The children met with the therapist and learned they could ask questions without worrying about hurting me. Lily asked if love can change shape and still be love. I said love changes shape all the time, but the good kind remains useful. Max asked if truth hurts forever. I said truth hurts less when you tell it early. June asked if spoons ever get tired. I said yes, and that is why drawers exist. We met with Mark one last time for a follow-up. He sat at the same table and asked Lily about the wings on the bus. She had improved the design and added a ladder for passengers who fear flying. He asked Max about reading, and Max showed him a journal where he had written 3 pages about Pepper. He asked June about the spoon, and she told him that it now sings less and listens more. He looked at me and said, he sees homes where people perform family and homes where people are family, and he knows which one this one is. He would not put that in a report. He put it in the air and let it settle on us like a small blessing. Sienna and I stood on a sidewalk after one of the exchanges and looked at the same piece of sky. She said she was sorry in a voice that did not try to sell me anything. I said I wanted her to be well because my children love her and because I am not built to carry a grudge long distance. She said she would keep doing the work. I said that would be enough. We nodded like colleagues who have learned to respect a line. A year later, the house felt like a fabric that no longer tore when a wind came through. Lily learned to ride a city bus with me, and the wings on her drawing felt less like fantasy and more like plan. Max built a tower taller than any adult foolish enough to bet against him. June convinced the spoon to retire and appointed a whisk to the role of resident singer. Sienna gained more time with the children after meeting every requirement and proving that rules can be learned. Derek is a rumor in a neighborhood we no longer visit. I still keep the envelope in a drawer that also holds a folded paper with crayon sun rays, courtesy of June on a day when she wanted to warm the silverware. I do not open the envelope. I keep it because some evidence is a boundary you do not cross for your own sake. I keep it because chain of custody is not only for swabs, but for souls. It matters who holds you when and how and under what oath. I hold my children under the oath of doing the next right thing and letting the drama die without oxygen. On nights when wind shakes the gutters, I lie awake and hear the house argue with the sky, and I feel grateful to live inside a structure that knows how to bend. I think about beams and rivets and welds and the patience of the materials that keep us from falling. I think about how love is sometimes a scaffold and sometimes a weight, and how your job is to know which job it has today. I get up and check the doors and whisper to the smoke detector that it is doing a fine job. I drink water and watch the moon doubt itself. I go back to bed and let the dark be dark without auditioning for fear. If you were expecting fire at the end of this story, I understand. Fire is easy to film. My revenge was not bright. It was a steady burn that warmed the room and cooked the soup and taught 3 small people that adults can be brave without being loud. It was a schedule on a fridge. It was a folder in a drawer. It was a therapist who asked the right questions and a judge who wrote the right words. It was a bus with wings drawn by a girl who believes that snow does not get to decide where a day goes. It was a house that held when it could have collapsed. The day the final paperwork arrived, I stood by the mailbox and let the sun land on my neck. The envelope was thick and official, and the words inside were a summary of the months that had felt like years, the years that will now feel like months. I read. I signed where required. I filed what needed filing. Then I went inside and made soup and delivered a spoon to each child like a small medal. We sat and ate and let the heat do what heat does. We spoke about games and books and the plan for the weekend. We did not speak about blood or betrayal. We did not owe those words any more rent. I washed dishes and watched suds collapse like crowds after a parade. I thought about Sienna somewhere else. Repair a life I hope becomes good. I thought about Derek somewhere else. Become a man someone else can keep or not. I thought about bridges and the way they stand without applause. I dried my hands and wrote 3 lines in my notebook. The children are safe. The house holds. The bus has wings and a ladder now. I put the notebook away and turned off the light, and the quiet felt like a kind of standing ovation only I could hear. The city outside made the noise cities make when they are alive and unconcerned with your story. I smiled. Not for a camera. Not for a judge. Not for the memory of a fight. But because the soup had been good, and the spoons had sung, and the future felt like a road that had been plowed overnight. I am Caleb. I test whether things will hold. Today they did. Tomorrow they will too. Because I will show up with a clipboard and a light, and the faith that small, honest acts move more weight than thunder. I am not done teaching this house how to keep us warm. I am not done learning how to let quiet be the music to which we grow. I am not done adding wings to buses. I am not done being a rock for 3 small hands and a man who knows when to stop talking. I am not done. I will keep building. Spring warmed the gutters, and the house changed its voice. The radiators quieted. Windows learned to open again. I began to close days without asking the night to clap for me. The envelope stayed in a drawer with a folded sun drawn by June on a scrap of paper, and that was where the past belonged. We did not reopen it. We did not let it run the room. Routines grew muscles. Lily learned where headaches hide and how to meet them with water and quiet before they grew teeth. Max kept a ledger for small wins and drew check marks next to jobs that used to make him grumble. June started naming spoons like they were teammates, and somehow dinner tasted steadier because of it. We found that a schedule pinned to the fridge can be a lighthouse when weather pretends to be a god. I gave each room back its job. The kitchen became a workshop for patience, where onions softened at a pace that taught breath to follow. The hallway stopped being a racetrack for anxiety once shoes had a place and keys had a hook. The dining table turned into a desk for science fair experiments that were mostly about courage. The living room became a stage for reading aloud on storm nights and for forts on afternoons when the sky looked tired of choosing a color. Order did not arrive like a sermon. It arrived like a good neighbor with a tool you did not know you needed until it fit in your hand. The court asked for updates, and I sent them without drama. The therapist asked for consistency, and I provided more than she requested. The school asked for forms, and the backpack returned home with them signed in ink that did not smear. Asha sent a note after the final orders were entered that said to live the plan and let the plan do the loud talking. I understood. A plan is a fence and a bridge at once. It keeps wolves out, and it carries you over water you cannot wade. Sienna kept her appointments and learned to speak in schedules instead of weather reports. She said sorry in a voice that did not audition for applause. She showed up on time and left on time and did not try to move the goalposts with charm. The children saw that adults can fail and then learn. They saw that a rule can be a kindness. They learned that love has many shapes, and the useful kind can be measured by hot meals, rides arrived on time, papers signed before deadlines, and a room that remembers where blankets live. I learned to be a quieter man in ways that did not make me small. I kept the lights paid and the pantry honest. I spoke low when storms walked the block. I fixed the hinge that had been complaining for years, and the door learned to close without raising its voice. I made soup on Sundays and put away enough to save 2 weeknights from panic. I kept stamps in a drawer so letters could travel instead of texts pretending to be care. I put fresh batteries in smoke alarms and showed Max why that sound is not an enemy, but a promise kept by plastic and wire. The investigator returned once for a follow-up and found what we had promised to keep. He watched a morning that did not need performance. Lily buttered toast with a steady hand. Max told a story about pepper as if a spice jar were a novel. June asked the spoon to sing and accepted that sometimes listeners do the best singing. He did not write everything he saw. He did not need to. Some rooms speak for themselves when they are in order. When the city thawed, we stood at the bus stop, and Lily traced the little wings on her drawing with a finger. She said that maybe the bus did not need wings after all, if the route was clear and the driver kept the time. Max said the latter should stay, because courage sometimes needs a step. June said spoons still sing, but they also listen. We laughed, and the bus arrived, and we climbed aboard and paid the little price a city asks for, moving you together. On a night when rain argued with the siding, I walked through the house and checked each door with a palm. I thanked the furnace for steady work and set the kettle to sing. I wrote 3 lines on a card and stuck it inside the cabinet where we keep bowls. The children are safe. The house holds. We keep going. Then I turned off the light and let the quiet celebrate with nobody watching. This was never about fireworks. It was about teaching a life to carry its own weight. It was about keeping brothers and sisters under one roof while grown-ups learned how to be grown-ups. It was about letting paper do the shouting so voices inside this home did not have to. It was about a judge who wrote the right words, and a lawyer who respected gravity, and a father who measured, planned, and stayed steady when staying steady was the bravest thing available. I am Caleb. I measure whether things will hold. The beams in this house are good. The children sleep. Morning will arrive, and when it does, there will be cereal in the bowl, clean socks in the drawer, a note in a lunch bag that says I see you, and a route to school that does not change without reason. The future does not owe us applause. It owes us a fair shot if we show up. We will keep showing up. Summer arrived with the smell of cut grass and hot sidewalks, and our block learned to breathe again. On Saturday mornings, we walked to the market together, and the table under the blue canopy became our checkpoint. The twins argued over berries and then shared them because practice makes muscle, and kindness is a muscle too. The vendor saved a small bag for us each week and called it steady business in a tired voice that knew the value of repetition. On the way home, the heat pressed on our backs, and the street shimmered like a trick. Yet the house at the end of the walk remained real and cool and waiting. It felt like winning without noise. Asha scheduled a review and asked what had changed. I told her that time had stopped being a cliff and had turned back into stairs. We showed her the chart on the fridge that tracked headaches, homework, chores, and bedtimes. And she nodded, as if watching a bridge hold under a truck. She reminded me that routine is not a cage when the door opens and closes on a rhythm everyone agrees to. The children listened without fidgeting because outcomes were no longer a surprise every evening. We left with a plan that fit inside one page and did not try to be poetry. The school held an open house in early fall, and the building smelled like sawdust and pencil shavings. Max steered me through hallways he now understood. And I let him lead, because leadership needs practice long before a boy grows into a man. Lily showed me the lab table where she built a model of a lung with straws and a plastic bag. And she spoke about air as if air had feelings you could respect. June introduced me to a paper bus she had cut and colored, and she explained that the ladder on its side was for courage on bad days. I thanked the teacher with a note written by hand and a calm voice, because the world does not improve by itself. Sienna and I met outside after conferences and exchanged the bag with the normal contents of family life. We did not discuss the past on the sidewalk, and we did not crowd the present with promises we could not keep. She kept her times, and I kept mine, and the children watched adults behave like adults. On certain days, her eyes carried a quiet that sounded like work done at a hard table. I respected that work, and we allowed our boundaries to stand without ceremony. A line can be a kind thing when it prevents collisions. The porch swing had been loud for years. One Sunday I took it down and sanded the chain where rust had turned motion into complaint. The twins held a jar of bolts in a serious way, and June arranged the screws by size because order likes to dress up as a game for children. When we hung the swing again and the wood moved smooth in its cradle, the house seemed to lean closer as if to hear it better. That night we sat under a sky that could not decide on a color, and the swing carried us without objection. The quiet was not empty. It was full of earned calm. We took a bus to the state park in October. Friends offered rides, But I wanted the children to feel the patience a bus demands and the reward a trail returns. Leaves broke under our shoes, and the air tasted like metal and apples. Lily spotted a hawk and whispered without words, and Max counted the beats between its wing strokes the way he counts steps when he is thinking. June collected small, smooth stones and named them after days of the week because she liked the idea that even rocks can keep a schedule. We ate sandwiches that tried to fall apart and failed, and we came home tired in the good way that makes bedtime a friend. A storm took the power on a Tuesday night, and the house learned to be old again. We lit a candle and read by its soft circle while the refrigerator clicked in protest and then accepted the change. The twins shared a blanket without bargaining, and June fell asleep on the rug with a book face down like a closed window. I checked the doors by touch and thanked the walls for their patience. When the lights returned, no one cheered, and that felt right. Joy was not a noise now. It was a held breath released softly. There were still hard hours. Grief has a long tail and it flicks the room without warning. On those nights, I cooked simple food that asked nothing fancy from the hands. Rice, beans, eggs, greens. Steam rose and steadied the air. We talked about teams and worksheets and the way rain beads on a jacket. No one pretended the past had been kind. We simply refused to let it run the evening. That refusal became a habit, and the habit became a form of health. At the winter concert, the twins played a piece where mistakes sound like honesty. I sat in the third row and listened to the way nerves soften when a room chooses to be gentle. June sat on my lap and leaned her ear against my shirt, and I felt her breath file itself into the steady folder the body keeps for safety. Afterward, we walked home slowly, because ice tries to argue with ankles in this city. Inside, we hung scarves to dry, and the radiator made the same old song that once annoyed me, and now sounded like a promise. I wrote letters that no one else would read, and kept them in a plain envelope in the safe. One to each child on a good day, and one to myself on a day when patience cracked, and I needed to remember what I am trying to build. I spoke in short lines and clear verbs, because clarity travels farther than cleverness. When I read those letters later, the pages did not shame me. They held the shape of growth in a way a mirror rarely does. In spring, the garden accepted our clumsy hands. We turned soil that had been sleeping and found worms that looked like small commas in a long sentence. The twins learned that water has to arrive where roots live, and not where the leaves look thirsty. June planted seeds in straight lines and scolded the sun when it hid. Weeks later, green broke the surface in a pattern that felt like an answer. We harvested a bowl that would not amaze anyone on a screen, yet it tasted like a house that knows who it shelters. Time did its job, and we did ours. Court dates ended and forms turned into files. The doorbell returned to announcing friends and deliveries instead of conflict. Soccer Saturdays replaced heavy mornings, and tired laundry piles meant the day had been used well. I slept without bargaining with the ceiling. The children grew taller in quiet frames. Sienna kept her side of the street, and I kept mine, and the space between became a safe crossing rather than a fissure. Ordinary replaced drama and wore better in every light. I did not seek a grand final chapter. I wanted a life that did not need stage directions. On a mild evening, I stood at the sink while the twins whispered about a school project. And June hummed a tune she claimed belonged to the spoons. Water ran clear, and the window held the last light. I realized that the test of this house was no longer whether it could survive a storm, but whether it could enjoy a small day without fear. That is when I knew we had won in the only way that matters.